Billionaire fired the waitress for spilling coffee, then found her ring in his car. The coffee hit his tailored suit like a splash of molten shame. It wasn't much, a few drops, but in a world built on control, image, and precision, it was enough to ignite a storm. Ethan Cole didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper than anger, the kind that froze everyone around him. The restaurant fell quiet as the cup rolled across the floor, spinning until it stopped by a pair of trembling shoes. She bent down to pick it up, the waitress young with soft brown eyes and hands that betrayed years of hard work. Her name tag read Clara. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, voice small but steady. "It was an accident." Ethan lifted his gaze, cold, unflinching, the kind of look that belonged to a man who built empires and buried emotions. "Accidents have consequences," he said, and with a few quiet words to the manager, her world collapsed. She was fired before the coffee stain even dried. Outside, Clara stood in the rain, apron folded in her hands. She had no idea the man she'd just served was one of the wealthiest and most feared names in the city, the kind of billionaire whose decisions could change economies. To her, he was just another arrogant customer who couldn't forgive a mistake. "Subscribe if you believe that kindness still matters," the narrator would say softly here, because sometimes the smallest act of grace can rewrite a lifetime of arrogance. For Ethan, that morning should have ended like any other. He brushed off the stain, climbed into his sleek black car and told his driver to head to a meeting. But as the rain slid across the window, something strange tugged at him. Not guilt exactly, but discomfort. It wasn't the coffee that lingered. It was her voice. That trembling apology that wasn't desperate, only dignified. He hated that he remembered it. By noon he had forgotten, or at least convinced himself he had. The day moved on in polished conference rooms and silent elevators. His empire never paused for feelings. Yet when he opened his car door that night, something glimmered between the seats. A small silver ring. He turned it between his fingers. Simple, unadorned, with a tiny engraving on the inside. "To Mom, always with love." It was the kind of ring that didn't cost much but carried everything. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole hesitated. He didn't know why he didn't throw it away. The next morning, his assistant noticed the ring on his desk. "Shall I dispose of it, sir?" she asked. "No," Ethan replied too quickly. He paused, then added, "Find out who worked at that restaurant yesterday." "The one on Fifth Avenue?" His assistant blinked. "The one you had the incident at?" He nodded. Discreetly. He told himself it was about the ring, about responsibility, about professionalism, but deep down something else stirred, something quieter. He wanted to see her again, though he couldn't explain why. When the report came back, it was brief. Clara Hayes, 27, worked there 2 years, fired on your order, single, lives with her mother on the east side. He read the words twice. Fired on your order. The phrase stung more than he expected. That night, Ethan drove himself, something he hadn't done in years, to a modest apartment block on the city's edge. It was past 9. Through the rain, he saw her silhouette behind a curtain, sitting beside an older woman helping her eat, her hands gentle, her face tired. He could have left the ring at the door. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed there in his car, watching through fogged glass, realizing with quiet disbelief that the world inside that small apartment, the warmth, the laughter, the simple care, was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Clara had no idea the man who ruined her day was parked outside, staring at the light she carried so effortlessly. The next morning, she returned to the diner to collect her last paycheck. The manager avoided her eyes. "I'm sorry, Clara, you know how he is. The man pays half our bills." "I understand," she said simply. She didn't beg or complain. She just smiled. The kind of smile that came from someone who had learned that grace cost nothing, even when life was cruel. And that smile stayed with Ethan all day, haunting him more than the ring on his desk. By evening, he couldn't take it anymore. He walked into the same diner again. The place smelled of burnt toast and coffee grounds, and everyone went silent as they saw him. Clara froze behind the counter, confusion flickering in her eyes. He placed the ring on the counter. "You left this," he said. She looked at it, then at him. "That's mine?" "Yes." His voice softened, betraying something unfamiliar. "I found it in my car." Her brow furrowed. You came all the way here for that. He hesitated. It didn't feel right to keep it. For a second, she seemed about to thank him. But then she smiled faintly, the same quiet strength he remembered. Well, Mr. Cole, I didn't expect billionaires to care about small rings. He blinked, stunned. You know who I am? Her gaze didn't waver. Everyone does. You're the man who fires people for spilling coffee. Her words landed like a blade. Around them, the diner was silent. Only the soft hum of the lights filled the air. He didn't answer. He couldn't. And yet, beneath her calm defiance, he saw no hate, only truth. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole didn't know what to say. When he left, he didn't look back. But something had shifted. The woman he'd dismissed as insignificant had pierced through a wall he didn't even realize he'd built. And the next day, when he walked into his office, nothing felt the same. The city outside looked bigger, the silence inside heavier, and somewhere deep down a thought he didn't want to admit whispered through him, a need to see her again, not as an apology, but as something else, something he couldn't yet name. Ethan told himself he wouldn't go back. He had no reason to. He'd returned the ring, apologized with his presence, and the matter was closed. That was how he lived his life. Issues resolved, debts cleared, emotions buried. But some things couldn't be filed away so neatly. For 3 days he avoided Fifth Avenue. He buried himself in work, in meetings, in numbers. But every sharp exchange in the boardroom, every fake laugh at a dinner party, every glimpse of someone carrying a tray of coffee brought her back. Clara Hayes, the woman who looked at him as if he wasn't invincible. He had faced investors who'd threatened lawsuits, competitors who'd tried to ruin him. None of them had left him as unsettled as she had with one sentence. You're the man who fires people for spilling coffee. He didn't realize he'd said her name out loud until his assistant glanced up. Sir, nothing, he muttered. Cancel the dinner meeting tonight. By evening, his car was parked outside the diner again. He told himself it was coincidence, that he was simply driving by. But the truth sat heavy in his chest. Through the window, he saw her working again, though not as a waitress. She was restocking napkins, cleaning tables, wearing a borrowed apron. She'd been rehired, and yet something in her expression told him it wasn't a favor. She had earned it back somehow. When she turned and caught sight of him through the glass, her face didn't change. No surprise, no fear, just quiet recognition. He stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed, and every sound in the diner seemed to fade. The manager froze mid-step. One of the cooks peered from the kitchen. Clara stood still, holding a coffee pot, waiting for him to speak. I'd like a table, he said. She blinked. We're full. He glanced around. There were 5 empty booths. Then I'll wait, he replied. It was absurd. Ethan Cole, who never waited for anything, sat in the corner of a diner pretending to read the menu. When she finally approached, her tone was polite but guarded. Coffee. He nodded. Black. She poured it, her hand steady this time. Be careful. It's hot. Her words carried weight, a memory wrapped in humor, and despite himself, he almost smiled. They didn't speak much that night. But when he left, he placed a tip, this time a $100 bill and no note. He came back the next day. And the next, always at the same hour, always sitting in the same booth. Sometimes he ordered coffee, sometimes dinner. Sometimes he just sat there, lost in thought while she worked. At first, Clara assumed it was guilt, then pity. But as the days passed, she realized something else. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there because something about that small diner grounded him. He'd watched the families laugh, the old man read his paper, the teenagers argue over fries. He was quiet, observant, almost human. One night she finally asked, "Why do you keep coming here, Mr. Cole?" He looked up. "Do you want me to leave?" She hesitated. "That's not what I asked." He met her eyes for the first time since the ring. "I don't know," he said softly. "And maybe I like how this place feels." She studied him for a moment, trying to read between the layers of wealth and pride. "People come here because it's ordinary," she said. "No one expects perfection, they just exist." "That's what terrifies me," he murmured. From that night on, something shifted between them. Their conversations were short but sincere, fragments of 2 lives that never should have intersected. He learned her mother was recovering from surgery. She learned his father had died when he was young. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did, His voice lost that edge of authority. Still, he remained a mystery. Then, one evening, Clara found a man waiting for her after closing. Not Ethan, but someone else. A stranger in a tailored coat, leaning against a car far too expensive for the neighborhood. "You're Miss Hayes?" he asked. "Yes. I work for Mr. Cole. He asked me to deliver this. It was an envelope. Inside, money. Too much money. Enough to pay her mother's medical bills twice over." She froze. "Tell him I don't take charity." The man gave a small nod. "He said you'd say that." She frowned. "Then why send it?" "Because," the man replied, "he doesn't know how else to say he's sorry." Clara stood there in the cold, staring at the envelope, her heart conflicted. She knew what pride demanded, but she also knew what her mother needed. That night, she didn't sleep, and the next morning Ethan came back, same booth, same calm demeanor. But when their eyes met, she saw something raw in his expression, something that wasn't pride or control. She walked over and placed the envelope on his table. "I can't accept this," she said. His jaw tightened. "You need it. I don't want your pity. It's not pity. Then what is it?" He looked at her for a long moment, struggling with the words. "It's gratitude." Clara crossed her arms. "For what?" "For reminding me that people can still mean what they say," he answered quietly. "And for making me realize that all the money in the world can't buy peace." For a man who rarely said anything from the heart, those words landed like an earthquake. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara whispered, "Peace isn't bought. Mr. Cole, it's shared." And before he could reply, she turned and walked away, leaving him in a silence that felt heavier than any deal he'd ever closed. That night, for the first time in years, Ethan didn't return to his penthouse. He drove aimlessly until the city lights gave way to quiet streets, replaying her words in his mind. Peace isn't bought. It's shared. It was then he realized something that scared him more than losing everything he owned. He didn't just want her forgiveness. He wanted her presence, and he had no idea how to earn it. By the end of the week, everyone at the diner had noticed. The man in the tailored suits who once looked out of place among cracked leather seats and buzzing neon lights was now part of the scenery. He never demanded attention, but his presence filled the room. The regulars whispered, the cook speculated, and Clara tried to ignore it. She'd learned to pretend he wasn't there, to move through her shift, as though a billionaire sitting in booth 7 was completely ordinary. But deep down, she felt the weight of his gaze, not invasive but patient, as if he were waiting for something she didn't know how to give. That night, her co-worker Nora cornered her near the kitchen. "You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say that guy's in love with you." Clara laughed softly. "He's not." Nora leaned closer. "He looks at you like someone who's never been looked at back." That sentence lingered in Clara's mind long after closing. She locked the doors, wiped the counters, and caught a glimpse of him still sitting outside in his car, not leaving, just staring out the window. For a second, she thought of going out there, but something stopped her. She couldn't tell if it was fear or self-preservation. When Ethan finally drove away, his expression was unreadable. The next morning, his assistant, Daniel, walked into Ethan's office holding a tabloid. On the front page, a headline screamed, "Billionaire Ethan Cole spotted in diner with mystery woman." Ethan barely looked up. "Trash, throw it away." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, it's spreading. The board might see it." "I don't care," Ethan said sharply. But his tone betrayed him, because he did care, not about the rumors, but about what they could do to her. Clara's world wasn't built for headlines. He imagined the stares, the whispers, the way judgment could turn cruel. By noon, he was at the diner again. Clara was behind the counter, hair pulled into a messy bun, focused on writing an order. He waited until she glanced up, and when she saw the tension in his face, her smile faded. "What happened?" she asked. He handed her the newspaper. "I'm sorry." She read it quickly, her throat tightening. They took pictures?" "I'll have my team take it down." She looked up, eyes flashing. "That's not the point. Then what is?" "You shouldn't be here." The words stung more than he expected. "You want me to stop coming?" "I want you to stop ruining things," she said softly. "For yourself." "For me," he flinched. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Clara folded the paper, her voice steady but trembling underneath. "You don't mean for anything to happen, Mr. Cole. You just appear. And when you leave, the storm stays behind." She walked away, leaving him sitting there alone with his untouched coffee. Outside, he sat in his car for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel. He wasn't used to being dismissed. People begged for his attention, his approval, his money. But Clara had given him something entirely different: boundaries. That night, he didn't show up, nor the next. By the third night, she noticed the emptiness of booth 7 more than she wanted to admit. At first, she felt relief. Maybe the rumors would fade, and life would go back to normal. But when she wiped the tables at closing, she found something under the sugar jar. A folded piece of paper with her name written in bold, unfamiliar handwriting. Her heart raced as she opened it. If peace is shared, then maybe I've been alone too long to know how. Thank you for trying anyway. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't manipulation. It was honesty. She reread the words over and over, feeling a strange ache she couldn't define. She told herself it didn't matter. That billionaires like him didn't belong in places like this, or in lives like hers. But later that week, a black car appeared outside the diner again. This time, Ethan didn't come in. He just sat there, engine off, watching through the rain-streaked glass, and then, as Clara served an elderly man by the window, she noticed something impossible. The man's car door opening, Ethan stepping out with an umbrella, and walking straight toward the diner. Every head turned when he entered. The bell above the door rang like a warning. He approached the old man and knelt beside his table. "Sir," Ethan said quietly, "I believe this belongs to you." He placed a worn wallet on the table. The old man blinked in confusion. "I dropped it outside," Ethan continued. "Your granddaughter's picture was inside." The man's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, son." Ethan nodded once and left before anyone could speak. Clara stood frozen. She hadn't expected to see him again. Not like that. Not humbling himself in front of strangers. After he left, the diner buzzed with whispers again. But this time, they weren't cruel. "Did you see that?" Nora said. "He's not what I thought." Clara said nothing, but her heart was no longer steady. Later that night, she found another note tucked under the coffee pot at his usual booth. Maybe peace isn't just shared. Maybe it's earned. For the first time since she met him, Clara realized she was beginning to hope, and that scared her even more than when he first walked into her life. For nearly 2 weeks, Ethan didn't return to the diner. The rhythm of Clara's days fell back into place, or at least that's what she told herself. She poured coffee, smiled at regulars, laughed when Nora cracked her jokes, and made sure her tips were enough to pay the month's rent. But every night when she walked home, she glanced at the corner table through the window. Empty, always empty. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to move his usual mug from the shelf. It stayed there, polished and ready, like a silent memory of something that hadn't even begun. Ethan, meanwhile, had thrown himself back into work with brutal precision. Board meetings, acquisitions, media interviews. His days blurred into a haze of transactions and strategy. To everyone around him, he looked more focused than ever. But Daniel, his assistant, saw it differently. "She hasn't called?" Daniel asked one evening, standing by the window of Ethan's penthouse. Ethan gave a quiet laugh. "Called?" She made it clear she wanted peace. "I should respect that. Respect or hide behind it," Daniel replied carefully. Ethan turned to face him. "You think I'm hiding?" "I think," Daniel said, "you finally found something that made you feel human and you're terrified you'll lose control." Ethan didn't answer, but Daniel's words lingered, heavier than any deal he'd ever closed. The next morning, Ethan drove without thinking. Miles blurred past the windshield until he saw it. The diner, small and stubborn against the noise of the city. He didn't go in. He just parked across the street and watched through the glass. Clara was there, hair tied up, smiling as she poured coffee for an old woman. There was something about her, the way she listened, the way her laughter softened the air. She had the rare ability to make people feel seen. Ethan realized then how long it had been since someone had done that for him. But before he could step out of the car, his phone rang. It was Margaret Vale, a board member and his father's oldest friend. "Ethan," her voice snapped through the line, "the foundation gala is in 3 days. Your presence is non-negotiable." He closed his eyes, remembering the endless formalities, the masks of politeness, the shallow compliments that filled those rooms. "I'll be there," he said flatly. When the call ended, he looked back at the diner. Clara was helping a young boy reach a cookie from the counter. Ethan smiled faintly. then turned the key and drove away. That night, Clara came home to find a letter under her door. It wasn't signed, but she knew immediately who it was from. I tried to leave you in peace, but peace without truth is just silence. I'll be at the Vale Foundation Gala this weekend. If you wish to understand who I really am, not the headlines, not the rumors, and come, I'll make sure your name is on the list. She read it twice, heart pounding. Her first instinct was to throw it away. The thought of stepping into his world, the luxury, the cameras, the judgment made her stomach twist, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, whispered against her fear. The next evening, as she closed the diner, Nora noticed the faraway look in her eyes. "What's on your mind, Clara?" "Nothing," she lied. "You're thinking about him again," Nora teased. "The billionaire with the quiet eyes?" Clara shook her head. "He's not mine to think about. But he left you a note again, didn't he?" Clara didn't answer. Nora leaned closer, softening her voice. "Sometimes people like him don't know how to ask for forgiveness. They just show up hoping someone will see who they are beneath the armor." That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about his silence, his awkward apologies, the way he'd helped that old man without expecting anything. Maybe Nora was right. Maybe showing up was his way of speaking. By the time Saturday came, she had made her decision. She didn't own anything remotely close to gala attire, so she borrowed a simple navy dress from Nora and tied her hair up loosely. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she almost laughed. "You're insane," she whispered. Completely insane. The venue was breathtaking. Chandeliers spilling gold light, violins filling the air, and guests wrapped in luxury. Clara hesitated at the entrance until a guard checked the list and nodded. "Ms. Hart, welcome." Her name. He had actually put her name there. She stepped inside, feeling both invisible and exposed. Every detail screamed of money. The laughter, the perfume, the arrogance in every smile. But then through the crowd she saw him, Ethan Cole. He was standing by the balcony, glass of champagne in hand, talking to a group of investors. His dark suit caught the light like liquid steel. For a moment he didn't notice her. But when he turned, when his eyes met hers, something in the air shifted. The conversation around him faded. He set the glass down, excused himself, and began walking toward her. People turned to look. Whispers started, but neither of them heard. When he reached her, he didn't speak right away. His voice finally came, quiet but steady. "You came." "I shouldn't have," she murmured. "Maybe not," he said. "But I'm glad you did." For the first time, Clara saw vulnerability in him, the kind that couldn't be bought, only felt. "Why me?" she asked softly. "You could have anyone here, because," he said, eyes locked on hers, "you're the only one who ever told me no." Before she could respond, a voice cut through the room, sharp, cold, commanding. "Ethan." It was Margaret Vale, and the expression on her face promised trouble. Margaret Vale stood poised like a queen before a court. Every word she spoke sharpened with disapproval. "Ethan," she said again, her tone carrying across the ballroom. "We need to talk now." Guests turned their heads, drawn to the tension slicing through the music. Clara felt her cheeks burn under their curious eyes. She wanted to disappear, but Ethan didn't flinch. He looked at Margaret with a calm she knew was costing him everything. "Not now, Margaret," he said evenly. Her eyes narrowed. "Not now. You're parading around with a waitress in front of half the board and the press, and you say not now?" Whispers rippled through the crowd. Waitress, Ethan Cole's date, unbelievable. Clara's heart hammered. She hadn't realized what it would mean for him, for her to be seen together here. Ethan stepped closer to Margaret. "She's not a spectacle. And I didn't bring her here for anyone's approval." Margaret's voice dropped, low but venomous. "You think your father built this empire so you could throw it away on sentiment?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but his words were quiet. "My father built this empire because he couldn't feel anything else. Maybe I'm done living that way." Clara felt something shift inside her, awe mixed with fear. The man who once seemed made of ice was cracking open before her, right there in the center of everything he'd been taught to protect. Margaret's glare flicked to Clara, assessing, dissecting. "You don't belong here," she said. "And if you care about him at all, you'll leave before you destroy what's left of his reputation." Clara's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But Ethan turned, eyes fierce. "Don't!" He reached for her hand, and in that moment time seemed to still. The touch was subtle, almost reverent, but it spoke louder than any defense. Margaret drew in a slow breath. "Then don't say I didn't warn you." And with that she walked away, her diamond necklace catching the light like a blade. When the crowd finally turned back to their champagne and chatter, Ethan exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, looking at Clara. "You didn't deserve that." Clara shook her head. "You shouldn't have stood up for me like that." She was right. "I don't belong here." "You do," he said simply. "You belong wherever you choose to stand." He offered her his arm, but she hesitated. "Ethan, you just told a room full of billionaires that you care about me. You know what that means for you." "Yes," he replied. "And for once I don't care." He led her to the balcony, away from the eyes and whispers. The city stretched out below them, endless lights flickering against the dark. Clara leaned on the railing, trying to calm her breath. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked finally. "Because I wanted you to see me as I am," he said. "Not as the man who fired you. Not as a billionaire, just me." She turned to face him, his eyes reflecting the gold and silver glow of the city. "And who is that?" He smiled faintly, but there was pain in it. "A man who spent years pretending he didn't need people, until someone spilled coffee on him and ruined the illusion." Clara laughed quietly despite herself. "That's quite a legacy to have. Maybe it's the first honest one." They stood in silence for a while, the air thick with something fragile and real. Then, softly, Ethan said, "When you left the ring in my car, I thought it was a sign. Something I wasn't ready to face. But now I think it was an invitation to stop living like everything's a transaction." She stared at him, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. "You talk like a man who wants to change." "I do," he said, "but I don't know how." Clara looked at him, really looked at the man behind the headlines, the polished exterior. There was fear there, and longing, and something deeply human. "You start small," she said softly. "You start with kindness." He tilted his head. "And if kindness breaks you, then maybe you needed to break," she answered. Her honesty left him quiet. A moment later he whispered, "You're extraordinary." Clara smiled, though her eyes shimmered with emotion. "No, Ethan. I'm just someone who still believes people can be better." Before he could reply, the doors behind them opened again. Daniel, his assistant, hurried toward them. "Ethan," he said under his breath. "The press just picked up on the scene inside. They're already calling her the waitress who stole the billionaire's heart." Ethan's expression darkened. "They can call her whatever they want." Daniel glanced between them. "You don't understand. This could spiral fast." "The board's furious. Margaret's already on the phone with your father's lawyers." Clara's stomach dropped. "I should go," she said quickly. Ethan reached for her, but she stepped back. "You can't protect me from what they'll do, Ethan, and you shouldn't have to." "Clara, no," she said softly. "This isn't my world, and if I stay, it'll only hurt you." He looked at her, struggling between pride and desperation. "Do you think walking away will protect me?" "It won't. It'll just prove them right, that love isn't worth the cost." The word love hung in the air like something too big, too raw to touch. Clara blinked, tears rising. "Don't say that," she whispered. "Not unless you mean it." "I do," he said. "I just don't know how to live with it yet." The silence between them felt infinite. Then Clara did something she hadn't planned. She reached up and touched his cheek gently, like she was memorizing him. "You will," she said. "One day." And before he could stop her, she turned and walked away, through the golden hall, through the whispers, and out into the night. Ethan stood on the balcony long after she was gone, the city below him shimmering like a promise he didn't yet know how to keep. The days after the gala felt like a strange kind of silence for Ethan Cole. The chatter in his office halls had shifted tones, polite but edged, his staff speaking softer when he entered a room. Headlines fluttered across his screens like vultures circling Waitress and Billionaire, Scandal or Salvation. He ignored them all, or tried to, but every night when the city dimmed to silver, he found himself looking at the small velvet box on his desk. Inside it lay Clara's ring, the one she had left in his car weeks ago. Its simple band of gold was unremarkable, yet it held more gravity than any asset he owned. "Sir?" Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "Your meeting with the board starts in 10. Ethan didn't look up. "Cancel it," Daniel hesitated. "That's the third one this week." "I'm aware." Daniel cleared his throat. If I may, you're doing exactly what they expect, losing focus. Margaret's pressing for a vote of control. The investors are nervous. Ethan closed the box and finally met his assistant's eyes. Daniel, tell me something. What do you think makes a man rich? Caught off guard, Daniel stammered. Sir, is it ownership? Power? Control? Daniel hesitated again. I suppose it's choice, sir. The ability to decide your own life. Ethan's gaze softened. Then I've been poor for a long time. He stood and walked to the window. The skyline reflected on the glass, steel glass order. Everything he'd built to stay untouchable. Yet one woman's absence had made it all feel hollow. That evening, he drove without destination, ending up in the neighborhood where the diner sat, and the same small, unassuming place where everything had started. The lights were dim inside. A handwritten sign read, "Closed for renovation." The bell above the door didn't ring this time. No scent of coffee. No sound of her voice. He stood outside, hands in his pockets, staring at the reflection of the empty booths. He could almost see her there, wiping a table, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, smiling at some stranger who didn't deserve it. A soft voice behind him broke the moment. "We're closed, sir." He turned. It was Mary, the older waitress who had once worked beside Clara. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "I wasn't planning to come in." Mary studied him for a moment. "You're him, aren't you? The one she stopped herself. The one who caused all that trouble." Ethan gave a small, rueful smile. "That sounds about right. She quit after that night," Mary said. "Tried to act fine, but she wasn't. Some things don't leave you easy." Ethan's chest tightened. "Where did she go?" Mary frowned, crossing her arms. "Why, so you can make it worse?" "I want to make it right." The older woman sighed, her eyes softening. "She's working mornings now. Small place by the river. You'll find her if you mean to." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Mary added, "She said you weren't cruel. Just lonely." Don't prove her wrong. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the riverfront as Ethan found the cafe, modest, painted in fading blues, with the smell of bread and butter drifting into the street. Through the window, he saw her. Clara was laughing with a young boy at one of the tables, handing him a cookie bigger than his hand. She looked lighter somehow, though her eyes still carried that depth he remembered, the quiet strength that made her seem unbreakable even when she was hurting. Ethan stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. Clara looked up and froze. Her smile faded, replaced by a guarded stillness. The boy at the counter ran to his mother, and suddenly the cafe felt too quiet. "Clara," he said gently. She blinked, trying to steady her breath. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see you." "For what?" Her tone wasn't angry. It was tired. "To apologize. Or to fix the mess I never asked for." He hesitated. "To thank you," she frowned. "For what, Ethan?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box. Opening it, he placed her ring on the counter between them. "For teaching me what decency looks like," he said. "For being the only person who didn't want anything from me." She stared at the ring for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. "You kept it all this time." "It was the only thing I couldn't put away," he said. "Everything else I could bury under work, meetings, headlines. But not that." Clara swallowed, her voice softening. "It's just a ring." "No," Ethan said. "It's a reminder that not everything valuable can be bought." Their eyes met, his full of regret, hers full of something she didn't want to name. Finally, she whispered, "You hurt me, Ethan, maybe not by what you did, but by what you made me hope for." "I know," he said quietly. "And I've hated myself for it." Silence fell between them, heavy but not cruel. The golden morning light hit her hair, turning it to copper, and he realized, for the first time in his life, that beauty had nothing to do with perfection. He took a breath. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to return what was yours." She looked at him, unsure if she believed him. Then, after a long moment, she pushed the ring gently back toward him. "It's yours now," she said, "because I don't need reminders of what could have been. I just need to live again." He stared at the ring, the weight of her words pressing on him like gravity. "You're not angry?" "No," Clara said, her smile faint but real. "You can't stay angry at someone you pity. That cut deeper than any insult." He nodded slowly, pocketing the ring. "Then I'll leave you in peace." As he turned to go, she spoke again, softly like the wind. "Ethan." He looked back. "Don't forget what you said on that balcony," she said. "You wanted to be a man who feels. Don't let me be the only reason you tried." He held her gaze for a heartbeat longer before walking out into the sun. But as the door closed behind him, Clara exhaled, her hand brushing the counter where the ring had been. She felt tears rising, not of pain but of something bittersweet. Because even though he'd left, something in him had changed. And something in her had too. 2 weeks passed and the city forgot. Headlines shifted, attention moved on, and the scandal that had once burned like wildfire dissolved into the usual gossip of the rich. But for Ethan, the silence that followed was worse than the noise. He didn't return to the office right away. Instead, he began walking, long aimless walks through the streets he had never noticed before, markets, bus stops, parks where children played with cardboard boxes instead of gadgets. He watched people laugh with nothing to their names, and it humbled him in ways he didn't expect. At night, he sat by the window of his penthouse. The skyline spread before him like a monument to everything he had misunderstood. He had built towers, companies, and power, but not connection. Not one person in that glittering city would have cared if he disappeared tomorrow except her. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the ring again. This time he didn't open the box. He just held it, feeling the faint imprint of her touch on the gold. That same night a message came from Daniel. "Sir, your mother's charity foundation is closing unless you attend the gala next week. The board says your absence would send the wrong message." Ethan almost ignored it. Then he remembered Clara's words. "Don't forget what you said on that balcony." Maybe showing up wasn't about image anymore. Maybe it was about facing what he'd run from all his life. When the night of the gala came, the hotel lobby glittered with glass chandeliers and polished marble. Cameras flashed as he arrived, but the difference this time was subtle. His suit was simpler, his demeanor quieter. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, but he wasn't there to impress. He was searching for meaning in a room that used to define him. "Ethan," said Margaret, his senior executive, approaching with a measured smile. "Back from your introspective retreat?" "Something like that," he replied calmly. "You missed 3 board meetings," she said. "Investors are uneasy." Ethan's voice didn't waver. "Tell them they'll survive discomfort. It builds character," she frowned. "You're changing. And not in a way that profits this company." "Maybe profit isn't the only kind of growth," he said, walking away. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't forget who built your empire, Ethan." He turned, his tone steady but sharp. "You mean the empire that couldn't buy peace or love? Keep it, Margaret. I'm rebuilding something else." He left her speechless among the glitter and whispers. Later that night, when the gala ended, Ethan drove to the river again. The cafe lights were still on. Through the window, he saw Clara, sitting alone counting receipts, her hair falling loose around her face. He hesitated at the door, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. A man stripped of armor. He almost turned away, afraid that his presence would undo her calm. But then she looked up. Their eyes met through the window. For a moment, the world stilled. Clara slowly stood and walked to the door, opening it before he could decide. "You again," she said softly. "Me again," he replied. "Are you planning to buy coffee this time or just guilt?" He smiled faintly. "I was hoping for forgiveness." She folded her arms. "Forgiveness isn't a transaction." "I know," he said. "That's why it's worth asking for." She sighed, motioning for him to sit. "1 cup. Then you leave," he nodded. "Fair." When she brought his coffee, he noticed her hands trembling slightly. She sat across from him, guarded yet curious. "So?" she said. "Why are you here?" "I've been thinking," Ethan said quietly, "about the kind of man I've been. The kind of man my father raised me to be. Cold, precise, successful, but never kind." Clara didn't interrupt. He continued, "You showed me what strength actually looks like. It's not in control. It's in compassion." She stared at him, uncertain whether to believe him. "And what do you expect me to say?" "Nothing," he replied. "You don't owe me words. I just wanted to see you one last time, without the walls." Something in his tone broke her. For all her anger, she could feel the truth in him, the sincerity that had never existed before. She looked away, blinking back emotion. "Oh, you really did change," he smiled sadly. "You were the reason." The clock above the counter ticked softly. For a moment they sat in silence, the air heavy but peaceful. Then Clara stood gathering the empty cups. "Ethan, you can't keep coming back." Whatever we were, and it ended before it began. He rose too, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know, but if there's ever a day when you think maybe we could talk again, I'll be here." She gave a small broken laugh. "So you say that like you plan to wait forever?" He hesitated, then said simply, "Maybe I will." And as he walked out, she watched him disappear into the night. This man who once fired her over spilled coffee, now humbled enough to admit he was the one who'd made the real mess. She touched her chest, feeling her heartbeat race, not from love, but from the ache of something unfinished. Outside, Ethan stopped at the corner, his reflection glimmering faintly in a rain puddle. He took out the ring again, looked at it under the streetlight, and whispered to himself, "She deserves better than the man I was. So I'll become the man she believed I could be." Then he slipped the ring back into his pocket and walked into the rain, not running from the past anymore, but walking toward the kind of future he wanted to earn. The story between them wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, Ethan understood that love, real love, and didn't demand possession. It demanded growth. 3 months passed. The city's rhythm continued. Traffic, chatter, deals, deadlines. But for Ethan, everything moved slower now. He'd stepped down from his CEO role temporarily, claiming it was for personal recalibration. In truth, he'd finally realized what wealth could not fix. His mornings began at dawn, no longer with conference calls or market reports, but with coffee at the same cafe where Clara worked. He never went inside. He sat across the street at a small bench by the newsstand, watching life unfold in quiet simplicity. Sometimes he'd see her through the window, laughing with customers, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied messily. She was radiant in motion, and yet she never looked toward the street. If she did notice him, she never showed it. He didn't blame her. Some wounds didn't close with apologies. Still, he stayed, and not out of obsession, but as a quiet act of respect. He didn't want to interrupt her life. He just wanted to be near the reminder of what it meant to live honestly. "Why do you keep coming here if you don't even go inside?" asked Daniel one afternoon, finding him on the bench with a takeaway cup. Ethan didn't answer at first. He stared at the cafe door, then said, "Because some things aren't meant to be taken back. They're meant to be earned slowly." Daniel sighed. "You sound like a poet. You used to sound like a general." "Maybe generals get tired of fighting," Ethan murmured. That night, back in his apartment, he took the ring out again. But this time something was different. He wasn't holding it like a symbol of what he lost, but of what he still hoped to build someday. He opened a small box on his desk, where old letters from his mother were kept. Among them was one she'd written years ago, the day he became CEO. "Son, I hope one day you'll meet someone who makes you forget about winning." He read the line twice, then smiled. A small, quiet smile of realization. The next morning, he made a decision. He picked up the phone and called Daniel. "I need the name of the person who owns the cafe building," he said. Daniel hesitated. "You're not buying it to impress her, are you?" "No," Ethan said. "I'm fixing what I broke." Within days, he bought the building, but he didn't tell Clara. He ordered repairs, repainted the facade, replaced the cracked outdoor lights, and installed new heating. Everything was done anonymously, billed under a local maintenance fund. It wasn't charity, it was gratitude. When the final bill came, he noticed one note from the contractor. Waitress requested that no major remodeling disturb the character of the cafe. "She says the old look keeps regulars comfortable." Ethan smiled. "Of course she did," he said under his breath. "She's protecting what matters." On a cloudy Saturday, while inspecting the last round of work, he saw her arriving early, carrying flowers to decorate the counter. He didn't approach until a strong gust of wind blew from the street, knocking her small vase to the ground. He moved without thinking, catching it before it shattered. "Got it," he said softly. Holding the vase between them, she froze. "Ethan." He straightened, setting the vase gently on the table. "Hi. I thought you'd moved on," she said, her tone guarded but calm. "I thought I did too," he replied. "But I guess part of me stayed here." Her eyes searched his face, and for the first time she noticed something missing. The sharpness, the defensive arrogance. He looked human. She crossed her arms. "You shouldn't be here. People talk. Let them," he said. I'm not here for them, she sighed, her voice softening. Then why, Ethan? Why now? He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring box. Because this doesn't belong to me anymore. She blinked, stunned. What do you mean? He opened the box, revealing the simple gold band. I found it in my car. The day I fired you. Her lips parted, the air between them thick with memory. I didn't mean to keep it, he continued, but every time I tried to return it, I realized it wasn't just a ring. It was a reminder of who I used to be, and who I don't want to be again. Clara's voice trembled. You came back just to say that? No, he said softly. I came back to give it to you because it's yours, and because I don't deserve to hold on to something pure anymore. He placed the ring gently on the table between them. Her hand hovered over it, but she didn't take it. You really changed, didn't you? I had to, he said, because losing you taught me that power means nothing if you can't respect someone's heart. The cafe was quiet. A note was the kind of quiet that makes truth sound. Louder. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she picked up the ring. This ring belonged to my mother, she said. She wore it until the day she died. I thought I'd lost it forever. Ethan lowered his gaze. I'm sorry for keeping it. No, she said, shaking her head gently. Maybe you were supposed to find it. Maybe it reminded you of what matters most. He looked up at her again, her calm, forgiving expression almost unbearable in its grace. Clara, he began, but she stopped him with a small smile. Don't, she said softly. Not yet. Some things take time. He nodded, understanding. When he turned to leave, the light from the window fell across his face, soft, golden, and full of quiet humility. As he stepped outside, Clara watched him go, holding the ring tightly in her hand. She didn't know if she could love him again. But she knew he wasn't the same man who had walked into her cafe months ago. And as she looked down at the ring, shining faintly in her palm, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe redemption could look like this, a man walking away finally at peace, while love waited patiently for its right moment to return. Winter arrived with its quiet silver breath. Snow gathered along the edges of the cafe windows, softening the noise of the city outside. Inside, the air carried the warmth of roasted beans, cinnamon, and something tender, the kind of comfort money couldn't buy. Clara had grown used to the stillness again. She worked, she smiled, she laughed with customers, but there were moments, between refilling cups or wiping the counter, when she would catch herself glancing toward the door, expecting someone who never came. Ethan hadn't returned since that morning. She thought about him more often than she admitted. Not the billionaire she'd once read about in magazines, but the man who had shown up quietly to fix the broken things he'd once ignored. The man who had learned humility the hard way. The man who'd handed back her mother's ring as if it were a sacred offering. She didn't know if she missed him, or if she just missed the feeling of being seen by someone who had finally learned how to look. That afternoon, a storm began to fall heavy outside, thick snow curling in the wind. The few customers left hurried out. Clara stayed behind to close early. She was wiping the last table when the door opened, letting in a rush of cold air and flakes that sparkled against the warm light. She looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway, his hair damp with snow, his coat covered in white specks. For a second, he looked almost uncertain, like a man out of place in his own life. Hi, he said softly. Clara froze with the cloth in her hand. You're here. I didn't plan to be, he admitted. I was walking by and it felt wrong to keep walking. She gestured toward the window. In this weather? He smiled faintly. Some things are worth getting cold for. For a moment, neither spoke. The snow kept falling. The clock ticked on the wall and the world outside seemed to vanish under white silence. Would you like some coffee? She asked finally, her voice almost a whisper. He nodded. If it's yours. She poured him a cup and placed it on the counter, sitting across from him for the first time since that day. The smell of coffee rose between them, warm, familiar, fragile. He took a sip, then set the cup down carefully. I didn't come to ask for anything, he said. I just wanted to tell you something I never said properly. Clara folded her hands, watching him. He exhaled slowly. When I fired you that morning, I told myself it was because I couldn't stand mistakes. But the truth is, I couldn't stand seeing someone who was good when I wasn't. You made me see things I didn't want to see. About myself, my life, the emptiness I'd been feeding with power. His voice cracked slightly, the weight of his confession raw and unpolished. "I've spent my whole life building things," he continued. "Companies, towers, legacies. But nothing I built ever stayed with me the way your words did." Clara's eyes softened. "What words?" He smiled faintly. "When you said, 'People are worth more than mistakes.'" "I didn't understand it then. Now I do." The cafe felt suspended in time, like the world had paused to listen. Clara leaned back, her gaze steady. "Ethan, you can't keep living in the shadow of what happened. You don't owe me redemption." "Maybe not," he said, "but I owe myself the chance to be someone who deserves forgiveness, even if I never receive it." She studied him, the quiet in his eyes, the sincerity that had replaced the armor. For the first time, she believed him. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The world you left?" He hesitated. "Sometimes. But then I remember how loud it was, how every decision felt like a transaction. You were the first person who didn't want anything from me." She smiled softly. "That's because I didn't know who you were." "Exactly," he said. "That's why it mattered." Outside, the storm thickened. The cafe lights glowed like amber against the dark. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded envelope. "I wasn't sure I'd ever give this to you," he said, sliding it across the table. "What is it?" "Something I wrote a while ago, after everything." Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a single line written in his bold, deliberate handwriting. "Forgiveness is not something you ask for. There's something you live for." She looked up, her eyes glassy with emotion. "Have you wrote this?" He nodded. "It's what your mother's ring taught me." For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything they hadn't said, everything they'd learned in the space between pride and grace. Finally, Clara smiled, small, genuine, and impossibly kind. "I don't know where this goes, Ethan. I don't even know if it should go anywhere." "I don't either," he said. "But I'm not asking for an ending. Just a beginning, if you ever feel ready." She looked at the ring on her finger, glinting faintly in the golden light. "Maybe," she whispered. "Someday." He nodded, accepting her words with quiet reverence. Then he stood, his coat still damp, his presence calm and steady. "Keep the envelope," he said softly. "It belongs here, not with me." As he turned to leave, Clara called after him. "Ethan." He stopped at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for becoming someone my mother would have liked." He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "That means more than you think." Then he stepped into the snow, his figure fading into the storm, leaving only the warmth of his words behind. Clara sat there for a while, the letter in her hand, her heart strangely still. She realized something in that moment. Maybe love didn't need to be rushed or forced or even declared. Maybe it simply needed space to grow again. Quietly, the way snow melts into spring. And outside, through the window, the storm began to ease. The snow melted slowly that year, as if the winter itself was reluctant to let go. The city began to thaw, and the streets filled once more with the rhythm of life, hurried footsteps, distant laughter, and the quiet hope that always came with spring. Clara noticed it first in the mornings. The way sunlight lingered longer on the cafe windows, turning the tables golden. The way regulars started returning with stories of plans, beginnings, and second chances. She smiled at them, poured their coffee, listened. Yet every time the doorbell chimed, a tiny part of her still looked up, expecting to see him. Ethan Vale hadn't come back since the storm. Not a letter, not a call, nothing but silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It didn't hurt this time. It felt patient, as though the world was giving them both room to breathe, to heal, to grow into the people they were meant to be. And so she kept living. She saved enough to finish the business classes she had once abandoned for lack of time. She took morning walks before work, breathing in the crisp air and watching the city wake up. She began sketching designs for her own cafe, small, warm and honest, the kind of place where no one ever felt unseen. Every so often, she reread the note Ethan had left her. The paper had softened at the folds, but the words hadn't faded. Forgiveness is not something you ask for. It's something you live for. She lived by it now without realizing it. She forgave her past, her fears, even the unfair moments life had thrown at her. And in that quiet forgiveness, she found peace. Months passed. One morning, as she arranged flowers by the window, a car stopped outside. Black, sleek, too polished for this part of town. Her hands paused over the vase. The door opened. He stepped out. Ethan looked different, lighter somehow, though his posture still carried that same effortless confidence. The winter had gone from his eyes, replaced by something warmer, something human. He walked in, and the cafe seemed to pause around him, as if the air itself recognized him. Clara froze for a heartbeat, then smiled softly. "You again?" He smiled back. "You make it sound like I'm bad for business. Depends who you ask." He glanced around as if remembering every detail. "You've changed the place. Needed a little color," she said. "And light." He nodded, his gaze landing on her. "It suits you." For a moment, silence stretched, not awkward, just full. The kind of silence that only existed between two people who had already lived through words and come out the other side. "I heard you opened your own cafe uptown," Clara said. "Vale House, people talk about it." He chuckled softly. "I did, but I don't run it anymore. I gave it to someone who actually loves coffee. And what do you do now?" "I invest in things that make the world a little warmer," he said simply. "Like this place." Clara tilted her head, amused. "You want to invest in my cafe?" He shook his head. "No, I want to be here." "That's different." Her lips parted, surprised. "You came all this way to sit here?" He smiled, the kind that didn't need explanation. "Every day, if you'll let me." Something in her chest shifted, not dramatically but quietly, like a door opening in a room she'd thought was closed forever. She laughed softly, the sound breaking whatever wall still lingered between them. "Coffee's still $2, she said, teasing. "You might regret it. I've paid more for less," he said. Sitting down, she poured him a cup and steady hands. Same routine, but the moment their fingers brushed as she set it down, everything that had once been broken between them felt whole again. He watched her as she moved around the cafe, calm and certain, carrying that gentle confidence he had fallen in love with before he even understood what love was. When she finally joined him, he reached into his coat pocket. "I brought something," he said. "Found it in my desk drawer. I thought it belonged with you." He placed a small velvet box on the table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside wasn't a ring, but a delicate silver pendant, a circle enclosing a small engraving, worth more than mistakes. Her throat tightened. "You remembered. How could I forget?" he said quietly. "It changed everything." She touched the pendant lightly, her eyes glimmering. "You know, I never wanted you to feel like you had to make up for what happened." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to. Because that day, when you looked at me like I could be better, it was the first time I actually wanted to be." She held his gaze. "You already are." And there it was, no dramatic music, no grand gesture. Just two people sitting in a small cafe, the sunlight painting them gold, the world moving softly around their stillness. He stayed until closing. They talked about everything, the past, the quiet months apart, their lives before they met. And when the lights dimmed and the last chair was stacked, he walked her to the door. Outside, the air smelled like rain and lilacs. The streetlights flickered softly, casting their shadows long across the pavement. Ethan stopped, his hands in his pockets. "You said once that you don't date customers." She smiled, that same calm, knowing smile. That was before one of them learned how to apologize. He laughed quietly, stepping closer, close enough that she could see the reflection of herself in his eyes. "Then I guess I should order another coffee. You'll have to earn it." He leaned in just enough for his voice to drop to a whisper. "I plan to." The distance between them disappeared, not in a rush but in a slow, certain gravity, as if the world had been quietly pulling them back together all along. When he finally kissed her, it wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, human, and full of everything they had both been too proud to say. Forgiveness, love, gratitude. Inside, the cafe lights flickered softly, reflecting off the windows like stars, and when they pulled apart, she laughed quietly. "You still owe me for that coffee," he smiled. "Keep the change." The night deepened, wrapping around them like a promise, not of perfection, but of two souls finally ready to walk the same road, at the same pace. Somewhere between the glow of the streetlights and the sound of distant rain, love had found its way home. Subscribe to be part of stories that still believe in love.